Well, welcome to the I5 podcast. It's been a bit of a hiatus, just real life, and also the charges were dropped. But aside from that, that much has honestly happened in the past couple of months. We didn't know where to start. Been changing by the week actually with what's been happening. We've had the Sue Gray report finally being released. We've had the emergency speech the last few days. We've had the war in Ukraine. So this week we're just gonna focus on the living standards, just because we have to start somewhere and try and keep it organized. I'm John, and I'm here with my co-host Jim.
Hello.
And we are going to discuss, quite frankly, which we're going to try and keep it light, but we are going to be talking about a very serious issue later on in the podcast. The situation involving the euthanasia laws in Canada. So just a bit of a trigger warning there. We will be discussing suicide, but we will give a warning before we move on to that subject. Before we do, let's get right to the crux of it. So, in the UK, going back to a spring statement made by Rishi Sunak, we won't go too much into detail into it, but to say the least, it wasn't great with what he actually offered to try and relieve the situation that people are currently living in. We've been hit by high gas prices, high electricity prices, water rates aren't exactly cheap either, food prices are going up, and the energy crisis is actually having an effect on a national scale.
Yeah, there's various reasons as to why this happens. You could say that they're a bit connected because it seems so far that this happened because of the Ukraine war, but one could argue that this would happen anyways up to a point because of COVID. Don't forget that during the lockdown, during COVID, half of the market was closed, the shops were closed. There's been a lot of shops that actually never reopened because they couldn't sustain themselves due to the expenses. They had no income and only expenses, for example, by renting, by paying rent and bills, etc., etc. So the market in general has taken a big hit, and after COVID, on top of it, you have the Ukraine war, and now, obviously, you have Brexit as well, and you could say, right, but we're not part of the EU. Why would this be affect us and stuff and yada yada? But the thing is, Ukraine and Russia, apart from gas and petrol, they also provide wheat, which we get from Ukraine.
Yep.
And wheat is kind of important for bread and flour, which is basic stuff.
Yep.
So because of the war, you have a jump on these products, and because the energy is more expensive, everything gets more expensive, because arguably you need energy to produce in the factories and stuff and whatnot. But this sudden jump in price hasn't been reflected in a sudden jump in people's income.
Yeah.
Quite the opposite, I would say, if you take account that apart from the rises in costs in terms of food and electricity and gas, it's also the taxes as well on top of it.
Highest tax rate in 70 years.
Yeah, so if anything, you're paying more and with the same money you used to earn. And especially for the power, there's a lot of households that can no longer sustain themselves. There's people who operate certain devices on certain hours, trying to cut down the amount of energy they're using, cutting down meals in other cases.
Yeah. I mean, going back to what you said as well about a gradual build-up, We saw a first energy increase by about 50% before the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war took it up by another 50%,
Yeah.
and we're bracing for one coming in October. Now, we do appreciate that there's been an emergency speech, and we will get to it. But going back to what you were saying as well about the actual energy affecting the country on a national scale, we currently are going through a situation where thousands of acres of greenhouses, these are not individual greenhouses belong to an individual person. These are literally greenhouses designed to grow food for the country. They're on the verge of, and some of them have actually closed down fully because it's not profitable to keep them going. The energy to keep the plants and the food in the greenhouses warm is costing too much, as well as the energy used in the artificial photosynthesis.
This is quite a dangerous thing also because we need to have a sustained economy. Every country needs a sustained economy. Like, if you rely only on imported goods, then you're at the mercy of the others. And if for whatever reason you cannot pay the amount they require, then you end up having shortages, which means that it's necessary for you to produce. And these greenhouses are certainly part of our production, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Because they're here in England, right?
Yeah, thousands of acres in
We might not be
England.
exporting what we produce, but they still like end up in the market as goods, correct? So yeah, it's quite a concerning thing that the greenhouses, the cost of maintaining a greenhouse, the cost of maintaining greenhouses is actually increasing to the point where it's not efficient.
Yep, and it can also lead to even more increases on food prices. I mean, the head of Tesco has already been on saying that a common, consistent behaviour now in his stores are people saying to the checkouts, stop scanning items at £40. Or, well, not specifically £40, sorry, that's just an example in my head. I was in Tesco's the other day and someone asked the till attendant that in front of me. They're specifying amounts to stop to tell them to stop scanning by once they hit that amount. Which I've never seen before.
I don't know about never seen before. I mean, the thing is, like, maybe
It's never been as
just
common.
my mindset, but it's always about having a budget of what you will going to spend on shopping weekly and therefore monthly. But this is how I was raised and how I adapted, coming from a country where, well, my parents were never actually, rich, so they were always constantly making a budget, which is something I picked on, especially since I moved here in England up until I get my first job. So I don't think it's weird to have a budget. It's actually a smart way to control your
True.
your financials. But on the flip side of that, if you're reaching a point where you're actually missing important and crucial, like, goods for food, for example, if you can't afford to buy the necessary ingredients to have your meals daily, then that highlights a big problem, very serious big problem.
Yeah, I mean, it can also reflect one or two other things as well. For example, this new trend of people saying stop scanning at this amount, it shows that people are losing disposable income. People don't have that spare extra £10 or £20 to handle going over. It shows as well people may not pay full attention to the prices of the food they're getting because they're going up so quickly, and they may underestimate how much what they're getting is costing. It could, it also reflects just money's not going as far as it used to.
Yeah, it reflects that the economy is going to shit, and if this is something new, that means that people are now a lot more concerned about spending money, which also affects the market, because if there's not enough money circulating, the economy degrades anyways, right?
Yeah, look at food banks as well, with people actually turning down things like potatoes, pasta, basically anything that requires energy to cook, which, to be honest, is most things. Because they can't afford the energy to cook them. They can't afford the energy to boil potatoes. They can't afford the energy to boil the pasta. The few who can, who go to food banks, there's stories of people using water to boil pasta and then using said water once it's done to flush the toilet.
That's insane.
I mean, that's like June, the Fremen from June level of water usage. The micromanagement in that to
Yeah,
prevent waste.
yeah.
2 months ago, it might not have been 2 months ago actually. It was a good month ago. Like I said, like we said before, this situation's been going on for a while. Martin Lewis rightfully said, and his name will be mentioned quite a few times actually during this podcast. Martin Lewis is a money savings expert. You see him on daytime TV. Has his own company. I think he has his own company. He's quite well networked. Has access to some politicians. Basically, he is someone who makes it his function, his job is to help people save money in various ways, on their bills, that type of thing. And even he's saying before now, a few months ago, that the tools he had to help people budget, the tools he had to help people save money, they were now irrelevant. They were no use because prices on energy had gotten so high that there was no way people could save money with these increases. The Spring Statement brought in a £200 loan. And make no mistake, it was a loan, excuse me. Part of it was a loan, it had to be paid back, but even then it wasn't really enough. Things got very bad, and it goes into a trend in British society that we're seeing now, and it's the difference between absolute poverty and relative poverty. So absolute poverty is income below need to learn to speak, income below the level required to meet basic needs of life, i.e. water, shelter, food, education, healthcare. Obviously in the UK, education and the NHS are free, so, getting there, getting to school, that type of thing, getting to work. This level of poverty is not affected by economic growth, so if you're in absolute poverty and your economy becomes stronger, it's not going to affect your situation. It's absolutely below the poverty line. Well, the interesting one is you also have relative poverty, which is 50% less than average household incomes in the country. You've got some money, but not enough to afford anything above the basics. Bearing in mind, actually, I'll get to that point once I've done the definition. The differences between relative and absolute before that, along with those, is that economic growth can change relative poverty. It can improve it if the economy grows. Now, there are things we call luxuries, but some people have put forward arguments. I don't really want to spend too long on this, but people have put forward arguments, things like cell phones.
Like luxuries
a luxury.
The term, like the line of what is a luxury and what is not, moves up and down depending on the context of people who discuss among themselves and the context of the general people living in the country and the economy of said country. It's quite a broad spectrum of what you could consider a luxury and what it's not a luxury.
And for example, just the mobile phone. I will say why a mobile phone is relevant in a moment. You could argue a mobile phone is actually not a luxury. Bearing in mind, I'm not talking about an iPhone or an expensive phone like that, like a stylish one. I'm not a big mobile phone person myself. I've got a smartphone. That's about it. But, even to be on universal credit, you're required to have internet access. And a lot of people get by that by having a smartphone, even if it's a basic one, a low-cost one. Now, the reason why I say that is the Department of Work and Pension Secretary, in a meeting, said effectively that because the public don't really have a good understanding of relative poverty, they don't really believe it exists. Well, I'm not going to be as collective as that. There's not a lot of awareness of it, the concept of it, because it can be quite debatable. It can be quite subjective at times. She basically said, well, the public isn't that aware of it, so, we don't really have to acknowledge its existence. Now, this is the danger with relative poverty. The key point is that it's affected by economic growth. So, in a situation that we're seeing, and going back to what the Tesco owner said, the middle classes can fall into relative poverty. They can be relegated into it. And people who are in relative poverty, if the economic growth keeps on going down, could be relegated into absolute poverty very quickly. So we could literally see all the different aspects of society, with the exception obviously of the ones at the top, go a division down, if that makes sense. People could slip, the middle class could slip into relative poverty. People in the upper class might slip into the middle class. We could see a decline in living standards right across the board. And if living conditions keep on getting worse, if gas and electricity keeps on going up, people could just keep going down and down and down, if that makes sense. And to be honest, we are actually seeing that currently. The middle classes are struggling to buy food. They are struggling to pay the bills. It's getting too much for them. So imagine what it's like for people on universal credit. A lot of people on universal credit are working as well. And this living standards, excuse me, this living standards, it's not going to go away. It's going to seep into everything. A big thing, a big factor in this has been the government.
Because what I notice is like one situation, for example, let's say something gets about 30% worse, it might get 10% better, but no more, which means like the amount of stuff, if you end up paying more, you will end up paying more and that's it.
Yeah,
And
3 steps back, 1 step forward.
Exactly that. Yeah, you summed it up perfectly. That's what I meant. And that was especially in regards to financials. And yeah, it's bad.
Yep. I mean, there's hundreds of little stories like this, and we'll be going into more of them. But that's pretty much the situation as it is. The government's reaction to this for the past few months, well, some of them have to be seen to be believed, quite frankly. The initial stages, a lot of Tory MPs would come on and say, look, you're going to just have to get a better job, which wasn't really an option. They said people on benefits need to spend their money better, and it wasn't really an option. I mean, a lot of them were spending their money in a correct way. It's just there's nothing you can do when the bills are so high and food prices are so high. The expenditures are costing more than what you have. Sometimes no amount of budgeting in the world can help you. And it was quite callous. They even started telling food banks, because remember the Tories think that food banks are uplifting. They were telling food banks to give people cooking lessons, because they were saying people not being able to feed themselves. Because remember as well, people have been rotating days where they eat. There's been cases where families the parents have been eating one day and the children have been eating the next. That level of poverty. And the Tories basically said maybe have cooking lessons in food banks, because people are not, they said people can't cook food. Jim, I think we were looking at a tweet as well by Kevin Edgar, the Tory MP.
Jump to that tweet, these preposterous statements are still better than what the Prime Minister of Greece has said about the increasing cost of life in general. What he said was that it's not about the money, it's about the people who you have close to you to make your life happier and more interesting. So people shouldn't focus on the money aspect of life. So yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a bad statement, because, I mean, that statement can mean something when it's referring to it's not life. Life doesn't revolve around luxury items, but when you're talking about my money's not buying food, it's not keeping me warm.
Yeah. A lot of people memed him out and made him like, the monks that meditate. They pretty much took the badge of a monk and slapped the Prime Minister's, Greece's Prime Minister face on top of them, and had bubbles with his statement. It's like how to achieve enlightenment. Yeah. Oh man. It's scenarios like that, statements like these from that you hear from people with power, and responsibility. And you hear them, and you're thinking, right? This must be some sort of a parody, some sort of ridicule on on the current situation, and it's not. This is actually legit
Mm.
what they unironically said and proposed as an answer slash solution. Yeah, sorry, I had to just intervene then, just to point that detail before we take a look at that tweet.
No, it's fine. I was actually just going to put one more point forward as well that I forgot just before we get to that tweet. That before when I was saying people are refusing things like well, potatoes and vegetables that vegetables that require boiling. You're talking about staple foods there. You know, potatoes, vegetables. You know, most staple foods we have require energy, so if people can't cook them, that could cause real emergency situations with malnutrition. But yeah,
Not only that, but maybe it could also cause the case that you have a lot of goods that are not being bought and just sit there,
yeah. Mhm.
which is also bad because you can't do anything about them, and you end up throwing them. They just go to waste basically, which
Weird.
is yeah quite uh, quite bad.
Weird story. When I was talking to a food bank in my area, there was a guy that legitimately showed up in a Rolls Royce, and it was his car, and he was there to collect food, you know, for his family. Fair play to him, but I mean, debatable point here. If you own a Rolls Royce, which he did, shouldn't you sell that if your family's struggling in buying a cheaper car?
Yeah, like I don't know. Maybe he wanted to get free stuff, like.
Yeah.
Uh, but if you're at the position where you would require food from a food bank, you
Mm.
certainly wouldn't own a Rolls Royce, and you certainly
Mm.
wouldn't drive one there. Like,
Yeah.
how stupid can you be? Never
Yeah.
mind. Don't answer that. I mean, we've seen a lot of stupidity from a lot of people.
Oh,
Most
you're
of
not
them,
kidding.
ironically, now seem to be in the government.
You're not kidding. I mean, yeah. The tweet we're looking at really does reflect that. So it was Kevin Edgar, and the backstory behind this was a nurse had done a BBC documentary. I think it was the BBC, wherein it showed her struggling. She was having to eat discounted food. Basically, was really struggling to feed her children. I think she may have been missing days where she could eat. It was quite a heart-wrenching documentary to watch a nurse who served during the pandemic to be in this situation. Now remember, the Tories all the way during the pandemic, they applauded them, had people applauding outside their houses. Didn't give them a very big pay rise, mind, but, you know, they got their applause. And he effectively said he's not sure what she spends their wages on. Sorry, he's not sure what she spends her wages on. You can buy a 50 pence bag of pasta. And then Jack Monroe replied very correctly that that is nowhere near enough calories. I think it's something like 400 plus calories a day, and it's a 1,500 calorie deficit. Bearing in mind this woman's a nurse, so you would imagine she's on her feet all day. So she'd definitely need those calories to, you know, do her job.
Yeah, that statement just shows like the amount of ignorance that some people have, and how far that some people would go to protect, quote unquote, the current government's decisions and decision making process. The main reason for someone to do that as a public figure in Twitter is because he or she would expect a sort of position and you know and influence in the next elections or something if current party remains.
Yeah,
Because it's important, like if you want to get involved in politics, this is also happening to Greece, but I'm not sure if that also happens here in England and to what degree. But in Greece, you basically need to kiss ass, and the way to do it is by one way to do it. Sorry, is to basically take it up to social media and express opinions that are in favor of government's way of doing things, regardless of how stupid or preposterous they may be or sound. So
Yeah, it's similar over here. Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, the rest of the front bench, they're effectively all yes men and women, which is how they've got their positions. Liz Truss even doing a full U-turn on her position to leave the EU. So it wouldn't surprise me if it may be, yeah, it could be this guy's just saying this to try and get in with the front bench, or it might be a bit of both. I think it's disdain, it's not caring how people live, and it's utter disconnect on the reality of how people were living at this point.
well, yeah, because it's talking. It's like it's different worlds.
Mm.
It's two different worlds. The way the lifestyle we have is completely different from people that can barely get by, and it's completely different than the people who are politicians and had like 10 times more are paying, if not more. So when you have completely different lifestyles from one bracket to another, it makes sense that you're completely unaware. But what is not what's the term? One sec. The thing that we cannot sort of let go and forgive is that these people there are responsible in the sense that they are elected to do a job, and that job has to do with managing a country, so they ought to know about the lifestyle that the average person has and what he needs to get by.
Yeah.
And they ought to do the best they can to make sure that everyone has at least like the very necessary amount of money in order to support himself and his family or her family. But like, I understand that it's not realistic, but the reason why it's not realistic is because of the decisions they made to begin with. Not this current government, but all the governments for all the years. You can go way back, but that's the reality of things, that this system has been constructed for years and years and years, where basically in each crisis that occurs, less and less people are able to survive, and nothing can be done, and it's kind of like survival of the fittest.
Yeah. It'll change where heating and potentially consistent eating will become a privilege of the rich.
Yep. And
Which is quite...
there's nothing we can do about this unless we start being a bit more caring. And as for the government, oh god, I honestly don't know what the best course of action would be.
I mean,
in general,
oh yeah,
the situation is so dire. It's like having 3 piles of shit, and they tell you at gunpoint, choose. No matter what you choose is shit. One might be stinky, the other one might be less stinky but more runny. No matter what, you're ending up with shit. And sorry for my language, and I hope no one was eating while hearing this, but
we swear all the time on this podcast.
No, it's more about how gross and the picture was, but regardless.
Yep. One thing as well is we actually will, with this principle of heat the person, not the house, because some people are turning their electricity off their boilers altogether. because some people are even struggling to pay for the availability of electricity. You know how you have that default charge for just having access to electricity.
Yeah.
Some people, the very poorest, are struggling with that. This will create a situation where the central heating isn't on, which in winter could lead to dampness of the house,
Yeah.
and that could lead to house deterioration.
Yes,
And
that's exactly my next point. That it's not just about hitting the person, but like all this humidity actually deteriorates the house.
Mm-hmm.
So you have an impact there as well. Mind you, due to the greenhouse effect, the winters have been becoming a bit milder, but that will
Yep.
cause issues further down the line. But I get what you're saying, and it's absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm.
It's like one crisis after another, and the scariest thing is like we still haven't seen the full extent of consequences from the previous crisis, and immediately we're having another one.
And one thing that's really going to make this worse was the recent Ofgem decision, where basically before a gas company could only raise its price every 6 months, and Ofgem, who are a regulator, to basically be on the customer side, have allowed gas companies to change their price cap every 3 months over 6. Now, what they've said publicly is this will allow them to lower their prices a lot quicker and will be better for the consumer. But I'm afraid I'm quite cynical with this, or I'm quite cynical on this, and I think that it's more likely that we're going to see rises every 3 months, or they'll use it as an opportunity to raise their price every 3 months.
It seems like it's all rigged. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, due to the Ukraine war, we increased by prices 500%. But wait a minute, is it possible to actually know the extra cost? Because if the extra cost was like something about 10% and you're increasing the cost by 500%, that means all the companies that provide power get a 400% increase in earnings, which is something they attempted to do in Greece, and they actually did it, but people found out about it. So the way to calm them down was to reduce for that year the bonuses that the top heads were making, but they still got the extra money. So yeah, it seems a bit rigged.
Well, remember,
I do get that there needs to be an increase because of the war and whatnot and the inflation, but the amount of increase that we end up paying, I think it's just bullshit.
remember as well, a lot of the MPs have shares in energy companies and oil companies.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's like they found an opportunity, you know. Some people they won't make it, and it's fine, because the very system that they support, it's designed. You could argue that it's designed to consume people who can survive in order to sustain itself,
Yeah.
which is quite scary if you think about it. But that's the reality we're living into.
Oh yeah. I mean, right now as well, the Tory government were using the local elections as a benchmark, not just for Johnson's position, but they were seeing how much poverty the UK population are willing to put up with. They're trying to see how much poverty the UK population, will put up with before it has a negative effect on them or a negative impact on their voting. And I think, to be honest, that's quite cruel. And again, the Spring Statement reflected that as well. You know, what's the bare minimum they can do without it having a negative effect?
Yeah, and the only reason they do that is because we allow them. And again, it has been proven that they can do anything and can get away with anything. There is no consequences whatsoever.
I mean,
So what stops them? Really.
Certainly not Labour. But we're also seeing it. We're also seeing something quite detrimental as well. The emergency services, police, firemen, nurses. We gave the example of the nurse before. You know, Priti Patel. She was talking. She was talking at a police conference, and like I said, the living crisis is everywhere because everyone's suffering under it. And a police officer pretty much asked her a question. You know, could she afford to live on $1,200 a month? And you could just see in Patel's face, like she was angry. You know, it was kind of a how dare you ask me this question? Of course, she couldn't answer it. She's got no concept of how to answer that. And aside from a very heartbreaking story about how this woman was a detective, I think she worked with adults. Aside from she worked with vulnerable adults. Aside from not being able to afford her kids' packed lunches, she couldn't afford to get to work because petrol was too much. She was starting to get a trend where she loaned money off her mum, and she was actually told by an accountant that she would be better off quitting the police, getting a second job, a part-time job, and just going on benefits, and that would make her better off. And the Tory government, to sustain the population, they've got, they're happy about food banks because it means they have to do less. So they're relying on charities to do government roles. And now it's a reliance on dedication in these necessary jobs. And that can only go so far. People can love their job all they want, but if it doesn't pay the bills and it doesn't fund your existence, you have to stop doing it. And when you have a stressful job and it doesn't fund your existence, then it can become unsustainable. And if, the police officer was saying that the police need more wages because it was specific to police problems, I can fully understand it. Emergency work nurses need more wages. Firemen need higher wages. There needs to be a higher living wage all around, and there need to be pay increases. She also made the point. I think it was someone who works at McDonald's is on £200 less than her a month or something to reflect the low pay. And the point I want to make is this country, unless something is done in a serious way, this country is at real risk of falling apart because the emergency services potentially could collapse if this continues to get worse.
Totally. And the thing is, like, the argument of find a better job is bad because every job is necessary. Imagine if all policemen quit because the pay is shit, so fuck you, I'm gonna find something better.
Yep.
So all policemen are gone. What you gonna do? How are you gonna regulate the laws?
You already have a shortage of them.
Or another example, the trash collection.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what their pay is, but if for any scenario, for whatever reason, decide, right, we're not getting a pay rise, we're barely surviving, might as well live off benefits, so fuck this job, and they quit. Suddenly, what's happening? You don't have trash collectors, and your society pretty much starts drowning in trash.
Yeah.
It's like realizing the necessity of a job and trying to keep people on that job should be above. It should be your primary objective as opposed to making profit. But that's never the case ever, because everything runs in money and people can't see past their fucking 1% growth in terms of profit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're
losing it 1%. They will choose not to just because of money.
I mean, we're starting to hit 70s living conditions in Ukraine. That's where we're starting to hit. We're starting to be living in what the living conditions were like in Ukraine in the 70s.
Yeah, and it's absolutely scary. And the thing is, I don't see, like, no one is doing anything. No one is complaining to the amount they should. It's like, the example of the boiling frog.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Exactly.
We're a boiling frog, and they just turn the heat slowly with its crisis, with its measure. Oh, the war in Ukraine, this gone up by 200%. Oh, it was COVID, the market was frozen, this goes up by 200%. Oh, the fucking comet grazed Earth, this goes up by 200%. And you just slowly but steadily pay more and more and more. And you have inflation on top of it. You have Brexit on top of it. You have the fucking trading with USA versus Russia versus Europe versus Germany. It's just never ending.
I mean, just a little tangent. This is where I go on my I hate the press rant. what you were saying about the frog in the boiling water, and what I was saying before about the population not being really aware of the concept or principle of relative poverty. They see someone with a mobile phone. Oh, well, if they're buying a mobile phone. I mean, that's a very, very narrow example. There are other ways of, assessing it. The mainstream media, Sky, BBC, GB News, although GB News is a young channel, a lot of their commentators are from talk radio, some of them are UKIP politicians. Effectively, before the living crisis really hit its high, and the population was reeling, up until a couple of months ago, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, you never saw the Westminster lobby talk about anything, any policy that had an impact on the ordinary population. You never really saw the mainstream media talking about relative poverty. It mainly focused on absolute poverty, which it should, but even then, it didn't do it a lot of the time. There was virtually no acknowledgement that people were living in poverty in this country pre these living standards. And because people didn't have an awareness of the relative poverty getting higher and higher over the last 12 years, as you say, the boiling frog, the frog where the water slowly boils and it doesn't have time to hop out before it's dead.
It's not that he doesn't have time, he doesn't realize that the water is so hot that it's actually killing him. There's a difference.
Yeah, poor wording, sorry. I meant by the time it realizes the water's boiling, it's already too late for it to get out, type thing.
Yep.
Yep, bad wording by me. But yeah, basically before this crisis hit, a lot of the middle classes and a lot of people who... I mean, to be honest, someone said something very interesting, which is there were some people who were living in relative poverty who didn't actually realize they were living in relative poverty. So when these increases happened all of a sudden, their living standards just dropped, if that makes sense. So then they were really left in it. The water, but they didn't realize the water was boiling on them. And then when the prices went up, that's when they realized. And they couldn't hop out in time before they got burned. So, yeah, the mainstream media do have a hand in this as well. I mean, I remember one of them was talking about something to do with the climate and made an innocent remark about, here's the food and there's food in the plastic containers we all buy. And it was quite an upbeat tone that she said it in. But someone in the pub I was in, watching it, basically said, oh, well, maybe you can afford that, but we can't. Because already at that point, the food prices were going up and people were struggling, But we've been speaking about the living standards going down. We've been talking about some of the politicians. There are two individuals who we haven't mentioned, and we'll get to them now. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is one of them, Rishi Sunak, who has come under a lot of fire, and to be honest, all of it is deserved. He was a media darling during the pandemic. He was softballed a lot with questions. And he was quite popular because in the pandemic, when he was giving out money, when he was giving the uplift to universal credit, of course, and he was doing the furlough scheme, of course, it's easy to be popular. Once the pandemic was over, that's when his true nature came out. People on universal credit got hit. The uplift, which should have been a permanent thing, was taken away. I mean, they meant it to be temporary, but they should have had that raise anyway. There were other things that he did that weren't very popular. For example, the cheating in the furlough scheme. He just wrote off all the fraud and didn't go after it and would rather go after the unemployed, which seemed a bit ideological. And with living conditions going down and down and down, he's the one being blamed. Now, we've called out Sunak before for having strategies like conflating two completely non-related things to avoid a question. He also likes to use big numbers to try and confuse people and give the illusion he's spending more than he actually is. When you roll out a number like, say, 300 million, that spread across the whole country isn't really a lot. He likes to do those things. But the media are getting more and more harsh, or they're getting more and more harsh with the way they treat him. And they're getting more and more aggressive. And just focusing on his attitude to, well, the windfall tax on the energy companies, again, he started saying things like, oh, well, I'm not doing a windfall tax because I want to focus on investment, which is valid, but the energy companies, to save their public image, said they were more than happy to pay a windfall tax, but he didn't want to do that because he's ideologically against it. And he also just palmed it off as just hating oil companies. But that's not even the worst deflection he had, because it was the idea that we needed immediate help now with the living crisis. The worst one was a curious one, and Jim, you're the software guy. It's when he said that he couldn't increase benefits to try and cope with the living crisis because the system, the computer effectively said no. The system couldn't be updated to increase benefits. It couldn't be changed to increase benefits, despite the fact he'd used it in the past to increase benefits and lower them.
I mean, this is just, no matter how you look at it, it's stupid. Okay, let's start with the first sentence. The computer isn't designed. First of all, the computer is not some higher entity which bestows its wisdom to us peasants whenever it feels like. The computer is controlled by people. Secondly, if you're able to raise taxes, you certainly are able to raise benefits. And let's assume that the software itself isn't designed. There's definitely a way to, if you want to. You can either hire developers to do it. There's bound to be a way, because at the end of the day, you're talking numbers.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure computers can do additions. I don't know the exact depth of or how the software is actually designed, but the term that can't happen doesn't exist in software engineering. It's more like this can be done under X, Y, and Z circumstances.
Yep.
But there are no circumstances. It's the case of just increasing the benefits.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, who's the bigger fool, the fool or the fool who follows in this situation? Because, you know, who's the bigger fool, the person who gave him the advice to say that, or Sunak himself for actually saying it?
It's, yeah, like, when you refer, when you see people referring to the computer or the software or whatever as a higher entity beyond our comprehension, then you know he's actually lying, and that thing can be easily done.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, his image has taken a battering at that point. At this point, he is trying to salvage his career to try and be PM. I personally don't think he's gonna. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he made it to Prime Minister, if he made it to that position. Sorry.
There's been, sorry to interrupt you, but there's been like a few scenarios like that, not necessarily relating to politics, where there was a software.
Okay.
People were like, plenty of software. Even most recently, the most recent one I can think about was like, wow, World of Warcraft. This is a very popular game. People were moaning about certain changes, and they were like, oh, these changes can be done because they are baked, inbuilt, and no matter what we do, they cannot happen. People got sick of it, stopped playing, and then suddenly, oh, look, next patch will actually contain the changes you were moaning about. So yeah, like when you hear people referring to the computer as a higher entity, saying, "Oh, this can be done," without even like giving a proper explanation as to why it can't be done, you know they're fucking.
Yeah.
And the reason they don't do it is because they don't want to waste money. They want to keep the profits, which is fair enough. But people are actually dying of hunger, you know, from poverty.
I mean, let's say it was. I'm not saying for 1 minute that I believe him, but let's say it's true, right? Let's say for 1 moment that is true. He has got a system which does not let you update the benefits given to people on universal credit. Again, despite the fact they did it during the pandemic. Who, in their right mind, would build a software that would distribute benefits when that couldn't increase them, when you know that you have to increase benefits every year anyway to keep up with inflation?
I mean, if you cannot increase the benefits, that means you can't increase the tax, right? Oh no, because we're using a different system of taxes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. But yeah, like, no matter how you look at it, there's no way that that is true. And
like I said,
there's no way that if it's true, it cannot be changed. Like, it's impossible. Unless they hired some fucking monkey. But even then, like, yeah, I don't know. I cannot see how that's the case.
And like I said, it's something out of a parody. You wouldn't expect it. I mean, this is the same guy who very recently, because you can see this on the government website, he spent I counted up to about $1 million on surveys and focus groups to start finding out information about why he's hated and what the public want to try and repair his image. Taxpayers' money. His wife's a billionaire. And he's using taxpayers' money to do that.
It's when you're a politician and you have some certain responsibility under you, like, I don't know, you might be leader in economics or whatever the fuck. If your first priority is your image, then guess what? Your image is gonna be always shit because you will keep not doing your job correctly. Therefore, will keep people getting angry at you. Because common sense, right? what do I need to do in order for people to like me? I don't know, maybe your fucking job?
Mm.
Like, get rid of your ideals for just one fucking second and realize what is the best course of action to fix the problems that are in front of me.
Yeah.
This is all it is. But no, you need to have ideals, you need to have like some certain direction which aligns each political party's beliefs, morals, whatever the fuck. I'm not saying become moral, I'm just saying that between a decision that aligns to the party's direction and beliefs and a decision that is like the best optimal solution problem that your country is having, you should select the second, even if it deviates from the political party's ideals. Because no matter what each political party believes or whatever, their job is the same, to dictate the country as best as they can so that people will prosper. I mean, ideally speaking, in theory, that's what they should do, right? But obviously they're not. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this debate.
Yeah.
And this is what really pisses me off, like having ideals and political direction as a priority as opposed to good decisions. Then you could argue maybe you would need good people, good leaders, rather than a good party. And I will tell you, you're absolutely fucking right. Why would you need different political parties where you have certain skilled people there that actually do their job and you actually see a difference in your everyday life?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point of having political parties if everything is shit? You don't have choice. So you might as well discard all the parties and find people who are good at leading and tackling today's problem in the economy, in governing the country, etc., etc. Is it okay if I like mention the Partygate stuff, or is there like other stuff you want to cover in this section? It's just...
I was gonna bring up the Partygate stuff actually with the recent announcement.
Yeah, like,
that he made.
Yeah, on that, it's just I want to mention for the Partygate stuff, the Prime Minister went out and said, "I take full responsibility." Okay. What the fuck does this mean? What does taking responsibility means? Like,
I know.
Okay, you're taking full responsibility. You paid a fine.
He's not gonna go. He's not gonna resign.
You paid a fine as a prime minister, which might be in the range of 50 quid to 500 quid, right? I don't know. Maybe 1,000 quid at maximum, which I highly doubt, because he has a title which gives him prestige. So the police can only do so much, right? At least that's my impression. I may be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. So,
well, you know.
other than the fucking fine, what does the sentence "I take full responsibility" means? I honestly, I tried to think about it, and
with Johnson, nothing has its
come
meaning.
up with an answer. So maybe you can enlighten me.
Well, you would imagine that in this specific context, "I take full responsibility," he would pretty much own up to misleading Parliament, and he would pretty much own up to breaking the law because he has been fined. You don't get fined for obeying the law; you get fined for breaking the law, and he would resign because he's broken the law. He's misled Parliament. He will not take responsibility for this. He says the first thing that comes into his head to try and get out of it. On this investigation, I mean, we can do I was thinking we could discuss this in more detail on the podcast. There were all kinds of fuck-ups with this investigation. Tons of the civil service managers who were involved in these not civil service, sorry, the Westminster staff who were involved in this party at manager level. Some of them didn't even bother filling in all of the questionnaires. They just left stuff out. And because they didn't fill it in, the Met Police couldn't file it as completed, but instead of chasing it up, they just left it and they avoided the fine. So all Johnson had to do was not fill the thing in properly, and he would have gotten away with it.
God damn, that's quite a loophole right there.
Oh yeah, Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, I can't stand him, but I agree with him on this one. He actually wants to investigate the Met. Well, investigate the Met, specifically in relation to this investigation, to see why stuff hasn't been chased up.
Oh my god, so now they're trying to chase up as to why stuff weren't chased up. This is such a shit show, such a fuck up. It's like never-ending question bullshit.
I mean, speaking of Boris Johnson, as well, before the actual local elections, he did that interview with Susanna Reid.
Yeah.
And Susanna Reid in that interview did more than the Westminster lobby, BBC News, Sky News, The Times, and The Telegraph combined. She did more than them than them in that one interview than they've done in the last 6 months.
And you know the saddest part? We still learn nothing because no matter what, no matter how difficult the spot, they keep fucking deflecting and saying bullshit. You never get anything reliable or anything hearing out of them.
Oh yeah.
But why the fuck are there in the first place? Like, I'm getting a bit fired up.
Well, I mean, that interview was pretty bad. I mean...
No, it was good. It was bad for the Prime Minister. And
it was bad for him, yeah, for exposing him.
Christ.
I know. Do you know that Dominic Cummings, his former advisor, used to advise him to not go on Good Morning Britain because during the pandemic and after, they were constantly hardballing the Tories, just not letting them off the hook with anything, so he wouldn't actually let him go on. He obviously went on Susanna Reid. He obviously went to Susanna Reid's interview for two reasons. One, he thought he could beat her in the interview, which he didn't. And two, I think it's because Good Morning Britain actually has it's got somewhat of an audience, while the other channels really don't.
Yeah, if you decide to ridicule yourself, what's not a better place than to go into a show that actually has... Sorry, not a show, a news outlet.
Yeah.
That actually has an audience.
I mean, some of the highlights of this interview was when he lost his temper and he groaned because she kept on pushing things and she wouldn't let him lie. But what really exposed his disconnect and his lack of awareness and his lying all in one go was when she told the heartbreaking story of an old woman who was eating once a day. She'd lost weight. She would stand in shops waiting for food to be discounted so she could buy it. It was that old trope. It's becoming a reality. She actually she had a what are they called again? Freedom bus passes. She had a freedom bus pass, so she would ride around on buses all day to try and keep warm the central heating on the bus. And upon hearing that, now most people, who were compassionate and, had a soul, would think they would be empathetic to that. In fact, they would realize how sad that is. They would feel sorry for her. They would want the government to help her. His reaction was, oh, well, I actually brought in the bus pass legislation to get her the freedom bus pass, which... a few points to make about that.
In my mind, where the clip should have stopped, and then you cut out immediately to the always look on the bright side of life.
It shows us. I'm sorry.
If I could do it, edit it, I would. I might go at that, but honestly, as you're saying, it just shows. At this point in time, while having this interview, he was so desperate to make his image look a bit better than it actually was. That he said, "Oh yeah, I did that, so." You can thank me. Thumbs up.
Did you hear her when she went, oh, so she should thank you, should she? Because two things. One, three things. First one, not only does that show a complete lack of awareness. Oh, well, she's got a bus pass, so she can sit on the bus for free, as if that's some kind of acceptable way to live. Two, he didn't bring in that bloody bus pass. It was a fucking lie. That bus pass was brought in 2007. He didn't do it, so he made that up. And number three, it shows he doesn't think about his lies. He doesn't think in the long term.
He doesn't think, period.
Yeah, he's like, it's the first thing that comes into his head.
The only thing that that matters to him is keeping his position as a prime minister.
Yeah.
Apart from that, he just doesn't give a fuck.
If he has to go, and if he's put into a position where he knows the party's going to kick him out, because I don't think the party will kick him out. I'll explain why I think that. It's just my opinion, but I'll explain that in a moment. He has covered himself in a similar way to Joe Biden did in the US election. It wasn't very advertised. I don't want to go into too much detail, but Joe Biden effectively said that he was a transitional president. He knows he's getting old, and he basically implied in a statement he was going to stand down after 2 years. Then he never made that statement again, and with Boris Johnson, he's covered himself in a similar way in case he's pushed out. He said on a few occasions that he doesn't like the pay of the Prime Minister. It's too low, and he has his kids to support. So if he's pushed, he'll hide behind that.
I thought the Prime Minister pay was the most, the highest pay you could get in England, excluding the CEOs.
I would have to look up what it is, to be honest. I don't have the exact figure.
I thought it's something close to $1 million.
Let me go on Google a minute and see if I can Google it. Because... oh shit, my phone is being a bit weird. Might be worth editing this part out, sorry.
Yeah, don't worry.
Prime Minister's wage 2022. Hold on, I've got the chart up now. 2022. Okay, so according to politics. So this is when we can start recording again. So according to politics.co.uk, I'll say this a bit clearer actually to make it easier. So according to politics.co.uk, the salary is 164,080 pence a year.
Oh, wow. Actually,
That's his annual salary. A lot of the people who become prime minister, if not all, are a lot richer. And let's be honest here: the connections, the lobbying. He'll be getting way more than that. And once he's finished being prime minister, he'll make a ton of money going on the lecturing scene.
Yeah, there is that. Also, what happens with how do you call it? Taxes? Do they actually get taxed because she's a prime minister?
I'll have to look into that, but
bypass? Because I
would imagine so.
You would imagine that he's getting taxed on the other, or that he doesn't.
I would imagine that he does, but on that note, something I can say is fact. During the actual national living standards, the national living crisis, the MPs actually gave themselves a £2,000 pay rise.
Yeah, of course, because they have kids to support and lifestyles to maintain.
Oh yeah.
Blame them.
Yep. And just to quickly touch on the actual emergency speech now that he made. So the windfall tax, Sunak did not want to do one of these. Tory MPs were told to vote against this, and they did several times. I think one was a couple of weeks ago, actually, if not last week. Now, what's he called this again? A temporary targeted energy profit levy. So a temporary targeted energy profit levy. So in his statement on Wednesday, I think it was, let me just get the stats in front of me. It was a £15 billion package. He's done a windfall. He didn't use the word windfall, mind, because this is a complete U-turn. So he didn't use the word windfall. He used the phrase I used before. And he's also put in, so he has taxed them for excessive profits, but he's also fulfilled his other plan, which people agreed with. They just wanted something to impact immediately over long term as well. They wanted something short term and long term, an 80% investment allowance. That was to basically calm his backbenchers' nerves, also protect some firms. But really, I kind of agree with doing that as well, as long as, it's not corrupt, which it probably is. But there were other things as well. So that original £200, which was supposed to be a loan, he's doubled that to £400, put it back in this package, and it's now no longer a loan, it's a grant. There's going to be targeted measures of £650 going to people. There's a bunch of people on this list. People on universal credit, people who are working on universal credit, families on a certain income threshold are going to get 2 lots of £325, one in July and one in spring. I think there's going to be an additional £300 to people who have a pension and £150 to those on disability. Martin Lewis was happy with this to some extent. I like this. It's something that needed to be done. Maybe it should have been done sooner. But it's what you were saying about Partygate. This happened on the exact day that this... Well, maybe... I don't know if it was the exact day, actually. It might have been the exact day. The exact day that the Sue Gray report was released to the public. And Johnson had to talk about it. All the details of wine on the wall, starting fights, everything like that.
Yeah, no, I don't think that was coincidental, because...
Oh yeah, it was to distract.
The opposite, because they passed a law, right? People wouldn't care about the law because you had the report coming out. So they managed to pass whichever law they wanted silently, by using the Sue report as distraction.
Well, he's trying to rewrite the ministerial code right now, but they've got a habit of waiting to do things, to announce things, in order to control the headlines. So, for example, when Matt Hancock was forced to resign after the affair with his assistant, they made him resign on the Saturday to control the Sunday newspaper headlines, to make that the head story. I genuinely think this was an attempt to distract from the Sue Gray report coming out, to try and distract from Partygate, because they've been using Partygate a while to distract from the living crisis.
Was a distraction for whatever thing they voted on the same day.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they tried to create another distraction to distract us from the Sue Gray report. This is a distraction So
yeah,
many layers.
yeah, it's distractions within distractions, because at times they've been using Partygate to distract from their. There's been so much going on with Boris Johnson's conduct. They've been using things like Partygate to distract from the national living standards. Do you know what I mean? Like they switch them depending on what's more convenient at the time. I mean, it's but now because of the Sue Gray report, they're having to switch them over. So they would rather talk about the living standards because of this. Over the Partygate scandals. I mean, the travel secretary came on to Good Morning Britain, and I never thought I'd see the day where a Tory would come on and say, look, I don't really want to talk about Partygate, the poverty that we're inflicting on the population, and the stuff that we're doing about it. Can we talk about that, please, over Partygate? Can we talk about the poverty we're inflicting on people over the Partygate stuff?
This is just like, oh man. Like, it's so surreal that it's very difficult to even comment on it.
Yeah.
It's a shit show. It's a circus.
Yeah. I mean, it's a complete.
You hear stuff like that from like Greece, and you do hear stuff like.
Oh yeah. It's a complete U-turn.
Yeah, and the worst thing is that nothing will come out of it. Nothing ever comes out. They vote whatever they want to vote. They pass whatever laws they want to pass. At the end of the day, we are caught with whatever consequence decision they're making, because it feels like, and it's law. They're trying to pass. It keeps having a negative effect on the society in general, but it also feels like playing head or tails, because some can have small effect, some can have big effect, but you can never be sure which is which. So it's like playing head or tails in regards to the impact it will have. But no matter what, you always end up. So
I mean, just a brief mention as well on the subject of opposition, because I imagine a lot of this will be going through when we cover the Partygate podcast. Labour have had some okay policy suggestions. This package the Tories have offered 15 billion. I think Labour wanted only 7.5 billion, so the Tories made it 15 billion to say, haha, we're offering more than you are. But Labour have been calling for a windfall tax, which, remember, this is what Sunak's done. He's not calling it that, but it's a windfall tax. He's also trying to make sure it's a one-off as well, so it doesn't become a set precedent. Labour wanted this for the last 5 months. The Liberal Democrats were calling for one since last October. But from the local elections, while Labour did well and the Tories took a battering, there was very low voter turnout, and there was a lot of protest votes. Labour are not getting ahead the way they should, because Keir Starmer's got his own problems with Beergate, and again we'll get into that on a different podcast, because that's like a whole topic in itself. Labour are not really proving good opposition against the Tories here, which is why the Tories, it's really public opinion swaying against them that's caused them to do this. Pressure from Labour hasn't really done it. I don't think Boris Johnson's scared of Labour. He's got quite a majority, and I think something that reflects this in the local elections. Again, I concede the Tories took a battering and Labour made some gains. I completely agree with that. It was good for Labour, but they should have done a lot better, and they didn't really. They're still unpopular outside of London. That's the problem. Bearing in mind that not all of the council seats were up for election. Some of them are up next year. So we'll get a good insight then, but this is not a good indicator for an election. But one thing I do want to vocalise, the Lib Dems had some success, as well as other left-wing parties. And what really concerns me is, going off the belief that Labour's the biggest party and the biggest threat to the Tories, if the Lib Dems become relevant again, back when the Lib Dems were relevant, the SNP weren't that big in Scotland. That happened during the course of the coalition. Labour don't really have a lot of MPs in Scotland, and Labour have had some awful elections because of that, and that was without any real left-wing competition from the Lib Dems. Even Jeremy Corbyn against Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn against Theresa May. If the Lib Dems come back, as well as other left-wing parties, and Labour can't get the Tory protest vote, and the left-wing vote becomes split, that combined with the SNP in Scotland, I'm not saying this is definite, I'm just saying there's a possibility that Labour might be locked out of winning an election. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but this is something like you can never actually predict the results.
Oh no, I know. It's like I said, it's just a potential scenario.
Yeah, I'm quite how they will turn out. But when are the coming elections? It's like next year or the year after.
A couple of years from now. But I just wanted to go on a couple of more points before we move on to our really serious one. Labour also are alien. They've got a bit of hubris and arrogance about them. Aside from the windfall tax and a couple of other things, they don't really have any policies. They've been reactionary. Don't get us wrong. I get that opposition is supposed to be reactionary. It's the basic principle. But they're also supposed to come up with their own policies, and they're not really doing that. In fact, they're struggling to define what a woman is. And the population's not responding to them. Keir Starmer has the charisma of a brick. I'm not going to say he has the charisma of a potato because, in a food crisis, that would be appealing. And the sheer hubris and the arrogance he conducts himself with. I mean, he's said to members of the population, I don't explain myself to you when they've disagreed with them. That doesn't make them look good. It alienates people. When you have a voter who disagrees with you, you don't insult the voters. Hillary Clinton learnt this against Donald Trump. Don't insult the voters. Even if they're opposite to you, don't insult them because you need to win them over from your opposition. And it's this arrogance and hubris which is alienating people from the Labour Party. One thing I'd like to highlight, the Mail did this disgusting article on Angela Rayner. I am not condoning it. I'm not justifying it. It was an awful article. They shouldn't have done it. But I do think this was a tactic to play Rayner, and I think it worked. When Angela Rayner got a hold of it, and she was on daytime TV discussing it, what I would have told Angela Rayner to do was to say, this article is disgusting, and I'm not going to talk about it any further. What I am here to talk about is men and women suffering under poverty, men and women suffering under Tory policy, men and women suffering from Brexit, men and women suffering from A, B, and C. I'm here to not let that distract from me attacking Tory policy, which is what it's designed to do. Again, condemn it as a crap article, but she didn't do that. What you had was a very rich MP with a lot of money basically playing the victim. And again, this is a controversial thing I'm saying, but there probably is a lot of sexism in Westminster. But it worked. It distracted from real... they did that, so she would talk about that instead of what the Tories were doing on the ground, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I just personally would have advised her to sweep the article under the rug. There were rumours that she started, and she was reveling in it as well. She was reveling in the attention she was getting because a lot of it was saying she was distracting men, that kind of thing. It was completely uncalled for. But she was reveling in it rather than attacking the Tories for the policies. And there's even and I just would have focused on the policies more. That's all. But like I said, the fact that Labour are popular in London, but they're not popular outside the country, the public isn't responding to these liberal elites in Westminster. They've lost their connection to the working classes.
Yeah, it's like in general the parties alienate the voters. I don't think it's just the Lib Dems. It's every single party.
Yeah, all of them have. Yeah.
And this is just quite worrying because that shows that no matter what party will come up in power, there's no way the situation will improve because they're so alienated. They're just not going to do anything that will help us.
Yeah, and the emphasis on and also the fact that we're being divided all the time. We're turning on each other rather than focusing on the Tories. Even Labour are doing that, and it's quite sad. But I think that statement is one for another podcast because just checking through the notes now. Yeah, just one last thing. A lot of polls are putting Johnson at a bigger disapproval rate than Keir Starmer, but the percentage increase is only something like 4 to 6%. Really, with everything that's happened through the pandemic, the living crisis, the care home scandals, Keir Starmer should be ahead by a good 30 or 40%. Yep. But just a heads up to the audience now, we are going to be talking about quite a serious one. Literally just getting to the notes now for it. Here we are. So, there's a disturbing trend in Canada where Justin Trudeau, who is not a popular Prime Minister, he's got a 39% approval rating, which is a major slump. 57% of Canadians disapprove of his performance. He had a huge blow when he dealt with the trucker convoy who were against mandatory vaccinations. Me and Jim are very pro-vaccination. We've both been vaccinated. We are not against them. The truckers were not anti-vax. They didn't want medical interference. They didn't want to have mandatory vaccinations in the legal structure. A lot of workers in the NHS in Britain were against it as well. And he became very unpopular when he used the terror laws to basically send in the police and start attacking them and beat them up. Now, they were causing economic damage because they were literally blocking the streets with their trucks and honking their horns. And he also used a lot of laws that were only supposed to be used in a national emergency to take their bank accounts off them, freeze PayPal accounts. So that was a big blow to his image. Add to that, there's another trend which is not being talked about by the mainstream media at all. It's mainly being talked, well, rather the left side. The conservative elements are talking about it. Sky News Australia are, Fox News have talked about it a little bit. In 2016, Canada brought in a euthanasia law. Just a marker. Hey Jim, I don't think we should go into the debate of whether euthanasia is valid or not. I think we should just focus on how it's being used in Canada. What do you think? Up to you.
We'll see how it goes.
Marker. So in 2016, the law came into effect. It was originally only supposed to be for people who had a terminal illness, so they would have the option to get state-assisted suicide. In 2021, the law was extended to move beyond that. So the criteria became a serious illness, an incurable illness, a disease, or a disability. Death doesn't have to be foreseeable, and there doesn't need to be any final consent, before the needle goes in. Now, the problem is that people who are disabled and poor, living in poverty, there's a trend now in Canada that's dangerously close to becoming a social norm, where people are using this law to commit suicide, and they are putting on the actual form and application too poor to live. This is a disturbing trend, to say the least.
Yep, it really is.
Just to give last few stats as well, just to build the scene. Canada costs about $5.4 billion a year. The ODSP, I'm just going to double check that. Yeah, ODSP is the disability benefits, and, well, to put it bluntly, Catherine Wynne promised to raise it. The Ford government cancelled it, only raised it by 1.5%. Trudeau and the federal Liberals promised to create a Canada disability benefit, but they've yet to deliver on that. Ford himself said they should just get a job. Some people who are disabled simply can't. In Canada, this isn't helped by a lack of affordable housing. The disability payments in 1998 were $930 a month. 24 years later, it's only gone up by $239 a month. Rising you whack in rising inflation, it's not enough to live. There are some cultural norms from this poverty, kind of like they call it an ODSP diet surviving tactic. So, for example, part of this culture is only eat one potato a day and for nourishment. It's barely enough to keep you alive. Drinking coffee because it can act as an appetite suppressant. Alternations on days of eating. So these are all culture trends that have emerged from this poverty. Just going through as well. Housing living conditions are causing people to commit suicide. And again, this needs to be highlighted. These conditions, through the lack of money given in this benefit, Trudeau promised to improve this with his disability benefit, and it hasn't come around. He's not done it. He's not provided it. And to be honest, this disability benefit has not been given any real significant increases in decades. And again, it's becoming a social norm. It's a very dark way of a benefits problem taking care of itself, because, like I said, the people who are on benefits, who can't get a job, who are hampered by it, they are applying to take their own life they are specifying, maybe it's one last act of defiance, they are specifying they cannot afford to live. Not they can't live with their disability, they can't afford to live. And that's being allowed. There's also, a Canadian government member said, we need to treat the euthanasia laws with, precision and compassion. Well, there doesn't seem to be a lot of compassion with the way the benefits are distributed. And just one last thing as well. Sorry, a bit of a mind blank there. The Canadian government themselves don't seem to be discussing it. Just to cover me and Jim as well, we're not saying the Canadian government is putting them into cattle trains or anything like that and marching them to death camps. But this is becoming a cultural trend, and nothing seems to be helping. Oh, that's what I was going to say. The people who seem to be intervening to stop people taking their own life because of this are actually anti-euthanasia groups. They're the ones doing it, saying it's not worth taking your life just because you're poor, and they try and work with them to help them. I'm speechless, Jim. Sorry. I know you've got a lot of opinions on this.
Yeah, this is like a warning sign, if you want,
Mm.
about how bad the society is. Like, you have, when you're born, you have certain rights, society, and certain obligations, if you will.
Mm.
But if the society that you're born with doesn't allow you to fulfill this, something is very wrong. This sort of reminds me back in ancient Sparta, a family was birthed a child that had some sort of disability, deformity. They would throw it off a mountain because
Yeah.
Sparta was a society that brewing warriors and nothing else.
Mhm.
Now, fast forward to today, rather than throwing them off the mountain, they give you the suicide chamber where you decide if you want to kill yourself, you come of age. And this is just wrong.
Yeah.
Like, rather than extending the law, they should figure out, okay, why is people doing this? What can we do better to prevent
Yeah.
and reduce the number of people applying? It's not extending the law to allow more people. This is like insane. Basically, you're creating a society where people don't want to live into. And rather than making it better, you just give them a means to terminate their lives. Even in the medical field, the idea of euthanasia is quite huge debate.
Yeah.
And now you're offering this to the public
Yep.
as an option. This is just, very,
You know,
very delicate, sensitive. At the same time, it's horrendous to think about.
I mean, the way I structure it is whatever your stance is on euthanasia, whether you're for or against it, that needs to be moved aside, because I think what can be agreed on is the idea of being too.
The views are irrelevant. As opposed to the fact that this is an option now that is available for public, for anyone who declares he's too poor to live or too disabled. And this is just a very big warning sign. That
It's
something
dystopian.
is wrong.
Yeah. I mean, whatever your view is on euthanasia, I think it can be agreed that this is not a way this law was not meant to be abused in this way. And
No.
the Canadian government needs to step in here, because it's a disgusting trend. I mean, Justin Trudeau goes around calling everybody a Nazi. I mean, he literally does. He called the truckers a Nazi. He calls other people Nazis. Well, in your country, the disabled are getting euthanized
By choice.
by choice. Yeah.
Which
And
is,
because thank you for that, Jim, because I was going to say it by choice as well. I just needed to take a breath. They're by choice committing suicide via a euthanasia law, because they can't afford to live, and the Trudeau government promised them a benefit, and he hasn't delivered it.
you could say he pledged a benefit.
Yeah, he pledged it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone has been following this Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp show circus, but yeah, she pledged it, therefore she gave it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
Like I said, I don't think Trudeau, like, I'm not accusing Trudeau of like marching them on cattle trains. What I am saying is there's negligence here, and there needs to be some intervention. I mean, is that not reasonable?
Yeah, it's very reasonable, but sadly, the worrying thing is that this has been accepted by the society.
Yeah.
Like, they sort of accepted, even liked the law. They think it's reasonable, and this is why it's so wrong. It shouldn't be reasonable to have a law, a regulation, a system that allows you to commit suicide by choice. So, and again, I don't debate whether it's right or wrong for someone to be euthanized. I'm just saying that the government shouldn't be able to provide such a mechanism.
Yeah.
In a broad way, the way that it did.
A country like Canada should be able to provide living conditions for people to live and not be driven to this.
Yes. Whether someone with a chronic disease or anything else wants to be euthanized, that's another debate. I'm just saying that it should, pardon me, it shouldn't be available in such a broad way and so accessible. It's just, there's all sorts of stuff wrong with that, like who can even determine and process if its application is valid or not, and what are the standards. It's like a lot of like parameters and a warning sign.
Yeah. I really hope this doesn't become a social norm, I hate the fact it's becoming a social norm in Canada, but I hope it doesn't get out of Canada.
Yeah, I hope so too, but at the same time, see that the people who live are sort of marginalized.
Yeah.
And this is very, very worrying. Fly. Give me a sec.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm trying to kill that stupid fly for 2 hours. I couldn't see. Because when it was flying, I actually quit. Anyways, what was I saying?
We were talking about lack of interventions, the thing causing it.
Yeah, we have been seeing that there's the people who are struggling to survive are rather than getting help, they're actually marginalized. And they are being sort of ignored and left in their own fate. So I think the opposite needs to happen.
Yeah.
But
Like I said,
really, in a scenario where we would get the suicide chambers, you would see a lot of homeless people trying to use them to get them, and then what would that say about the society? Because the problem with people living in poverty, the homeless, and stuff, it's around us, but we all grew to ignore it.
Yeah.
And pretend that it's
Yeah, we
not
did.
there.
I mean, I hate to say
That's
this,
not
but
the way to go with it. That's not the solution.
look at us with the when we go around our shopping center. How many homeless people do we walk by? How many fights have we seen?
Yeah, yeah. It's something that needs to change, really. But
There are people talking about it in Canada, but I wish there was more international condemnation of this to try and pressure him.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the people in power don't want to be bothered with that.
Yeah.
They're probably thinking, right, now there's another way to get rid of people, annoying people. So,
Yep.
Yeah. Anyways, I think that pretty much covers all the
It
topics
does.
we had to talk to today.
It does, and like I said, this one was a bit heavy. We kept the Canadian suicide one until last, so anyone who doesn't want to listen to that can avoid it. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. To everyone, thank you for listening. We hope, even if you agree or disagree, we hope this was an engaging conversation for you.
And yeah, maybe
if
it
you
put you, in a position to think some things over, because it's about triggering your judgment and your critical thinking a bit, because that is what this whole podcast is about at the end of the day.
If somehow a bigger YouTube channel sees this, or I dare say maybe a press member hears this, even though no one will, please think about what we've said about what's happening in Canada, and think about talking about it and raising awareness.
Well said.
Yep. I'm John, and I've been doing this with Jim, and we'll see you in the next podcast. And we're also going to be doing more comedy interviews as well.
Yep. More content is coming in general. Hehe.
Mm-hmm.
See you in the next one.
Yep. Bye, guys. And don't forget to like and subscribe.